Hello, and welcome to 10 Very Big Books, a Malazan read-through podcast. My name is Peter Bond, and with me today is my friend and closest confidant, India Jones.
Hello!
Our producer, AJ Fileri.
I am here.
And he's actually a pretty good lacrosse player, Joshua Dean Baker.
Not true. Barely average.
You had to get the sports plug.
Yeah, thank you.
But of course, with us today is Steven Erikson. Thank you for returning to the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Looking forward to this.
Hooray!
Yeah, so we just finished our read-through of the Bonehunters. And before we move on to book 7, Reaper's Gale, we wanted to sit down, catch up, and have a chat. So here we are. And Steve, looking back, book 6, how do you think that one turned out? Feel good about it?
Yeah, I think so. It was always a problematic book because there's a lot of ground that had to be covered. And I had to make a major shift partway through it. And so it always sort of I found it challenging structurally, but at the same time, it needed to be done because up until this point, what you were looking at was basically the last few episodes related to the bridge burners, and so you got to see the end of what became a legendary army. And with what you started to see from the 4th book onwards is the birth of a new legendary army, and that's the Bonehunters. So I had to sort of put them onto center stage, and it took a bit of maneuvering in order to do so.
Yeah, we said a lot when we first started reading this book that it felt like we were coming back to like old friends, and like we were being embraced into a big group hug. Did it feel like that coming back to like the Bonehunters? I guess.
Well, it was so long ago. Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. More of a sense of, okay, now I've set the table, and I have to start picking up those elements that are going to proceed through to the end of the series. And so in that sense, that felt good to come back to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me build on that, because you mentioned you're picking the elements that are going to proceed through to the end of the series. Since the story is so expansive and has so many different cast members and, all these different storylines in the first half of the series, how did you pick which elements were going through all the way to the end of the series? Which ones, how did you discern that process between this storyline is best to end here at the end of a given book, or to go all the way, so to speak?
I guess, I don't know, even if you think of individual novels, you'll get character storylines that will parallel another character's storyline. And in some cases, one of those characters drops off. Either they're killed or they head off into the sunset or whatever. And I allow myself to do that because I've got the other character to sort of pick up that thematic thread and continue it. And so that's kind of the same way with the larger elements. So, I just mentioned the end of the bridge burners and the rise, the birth of the Bonehunters. So all the functions that the bridge burners had in the earlier books are now picked up by this new cast of characters. And in this case, we get to see where it all begins, which we didn't with Gardens of the Moon. The bridge burners were in their last days already. So in a sense, it's serving the same function. And so wherever I can replace something, then that thing that I can replace then can stand alone within a book and be closed off, because I know that I'm continuing the thematic thread with another set of characters or another circumstance or another storyline. So I think that probably played a large role into sort of deciding what goes and what stays. And then in some cases, with certain characters, well, I knew they were there at the end, so I was committed to keeping them there.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're talking about obviously we get a lot of new characters, or not even new characters in this book, but characters that we previously maybe didn't know would be, sort of continuing through, especially from book 4. In my opinion, the characters in the 14th, are some of the ones that I maybe vaguely remembered them existing, but in this book they came much more into their own. What do you, when you have such a short time, and I mean, I know, well, not short is relative, it's a long book, but when you're trying to quickly characterize all these soldiers, and you can't really give each of them their own little soliloquy, for 4 pages of exposition. What do you as an author try to focus on to like give them their own distinct feel and make them memorable for the audience? Because I found the characters great, but I don't know how you do it so quickly.
So in terms of the 14th, you're thinking of like Ferret and Sort and people like that?
Yeah, and Korik and Smiles and all them.
Right. Okay. Well, it depends. I mean, Korik and Smiles and Tar and Bottle were all role-played characters by people. So I had something right there that was I could build off of.
Mm-hmm.
So a certain level, at least for me, of familiarity with these characters. Ferret and Sort probably was an NPC, although I can't remember. But it's more a case of one writes what is needed for the scene in order to differentiate these characters, and then you build off of that as you keep going. And so, yeah, one is kind of building the character at each time they step into a scene. You're just building off of what you've already established. But in terms of writing, it's a different process when you're creating a character who is going to be present for all of 2 scenes to serve that particular function. Then there is a fair bit of I guess expositional filling in background, but just enough, not a lot, just enough to actually deliver whatever kind of impact you're looking for when you write the scene.
Cool.
And I've got character lists, and I had the 14 certainly had far more named characters than what we saw and what you will see in the series. And sometimes what I decide in terms of which character I want to actually run with is whether I like their name or not. But if I don't like their name, I may well just kill them off. Drop them.
So if we ever come across a character with a really bad name, like don't
get
out
attached.
hope, like they're gonna die.
Yeah, don't get attached. Yeah, if it's not, it's more a case of if it's not a memorable name in some fashion.
Got it.
That makes sense.
So when you're running a game, at least when I did, I populate squad after squad within a company, and then there's battles and all the rest, and you have to decide which names you cross off the list in those squads, and I just cross off the ones that I didn't come up with a good enough name for, and off they go.
Yeah, every John is immediately X.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then certain characters whose names I absolutely love. I mean, they're impossible to kill. So they hang around.
It really bums me out because I think Whiskey Jack's such a good name, and now I know you just were like not good enough though. It really hurts.
Well, in my defense, it's Cam's creation of the name. I didn't create Whiskey Jack, so I wasn't particularly a fan one way or the other of it. I was quite neutral when it came to Whiskey Jack.
And then he got axed.
Yeah.
So
we see where you landed.
I don't want to derail us too much because I don't really know anything about these books, but Peter and Iskar Jarek are doing an ice series of all the novels of the Fallen, and
ice series.
Cam.
Yeah, Cam.
It's his name.
The companion novels to these, but there is a character named Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, I was just curious how you felt about the name Kyle.
Well, it's one of those things where. I mean, that's a diminutive of his name. It's a longer name. I think it's Carlian or something along those lines. It's one of those sort of unfortunate things where you've created a character and people pick up on the naming convention. I mean, I don't see it very different from Quick Ben, for example.
I was right about to bring up the Quick Ben thing. Yeah,
so I'm not particularly bothered one way or the other, but I know some readers can. I guess I don't know. I guess there's too much of this world's cultural baggage that can be attached to a recognizable name.
Yeah, sure.
But,
yeah.
I mean, the origins of Quick Ben was the fictional character Ben Quick in the Faulkner novel. Long Hot Summer. So and I just inverted Ben Quick Ben.
You a big Faulkner fan?
I am a fan. But I probably lean more towards the Hemingway thing. I mean, I was remembering this talking with AP not long ago. But Cam and I were roommates going to university here in Victoria, and we were watching a lot of classic films. And I mean, one of them was Long Hot Summer with Paul Newman. I think that version. There's been a remake that's not quite as good, but the Paul Newman one is a fabulous story, a fabulous film. And we were watching that at the time when Quickman was created as a character. So that's basically sprang straight from the film we were watching. And I was appreciating it. I think the script was written by Hemingway, and I think Hemingway and Faulkner was kind of sort of doing this back and forth. Faulkner wrote the script for To Have and to Have Not, Hemingway's story that got adapted with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall's first film. So they were messing around with each other, even though stylistically they were at the opposite ends of American literature. Yeah. They obviously didn't mind, and so they were blasting into each other's territories with script writing, which I thought was really cool.
I didn't know both of them wrote scripts. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yeah, I could be wrong on the Long Hot Summer. But I'm definitely not wrong on To Have and to Have Not. That's a Faulkner script.
To pivot into Hemingway, what age, Steve, do you think that Hemingway can start to be understood? Because as an American student, I was tasked with reading The Sun Also Rises as like an 11th grader, and it super made no sense. And now I'm like, when I think back on that book, I'm like, I feel like if I read it now, I would get a whole suite of things from it. And I imagine it changes even as you keep, aging and reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably would. I don't know if there's a limit on like an age limit. It's more what you've been exposed to in your life. And as a reader for that matter, because Hemingway approaches the craft of writing as he would in his reporting. So it's a very journalistic style. But he also, he plays with sentence structure in a way that you wouldn't see in a newspaper or a magazine article, for that matter. So he was doing some other things. And I guess the modern equivalent would be Cormac McCarthy. Hemingway sort of did this paring down style, kind of reducing its diction level, if you will. The language is very sparse. It's very clinical and understated. Sentence structure sometimes not so, but definitely language, diction levels. Faulkner went the other way, very lyrical, very poetic stuff. And Cormac McCarthy, if you read The Road, that is kind of Hemingway brought to an absurd level stylistically, where everything is pared down. So it almost becomes devoid of almost any kind of human content to it. At least that's my sense, my reading of it. I did not enjoy reading that book at all. I was very frustrated by it.
Not that it has to be one or the other, but if you had to try and, because we don't need to create a binary, but it's like if you had to try and think about where you feel like your style falls in this spectrum, do you feel like you're more sparse? Do you feel like you're more falling into this more evocative thing? Or
I've stolen freely from both of them. I love some of the sentence structures that Hemingway messes around with, especially when he creates settings. He does his way of sort of loading everything into a single sentence, which I really quite like. Faulkner's more the lyrical turn of phrase. It's fecund as a writing style, very, very rich. And I steal from both. And quite often it depends on the section I'm writing. It depends on the novel I'm writing. The Malazan stuff it's somewhere in between. It's if we were to put it in context for fantasy fiction, it's somewhere between Glenn Cook's Black Company and Donaldson's Covenant series. It's somewhere in between, because I stole from both of those two.
Before we move on, I did want to just quick clarify. I looked it up, and I think Faulkner helped write both scripts, but I don't think Hemingway wrote either of them.
Fair enough.
So just got a quick clarification.
No,
but I
that's
still
good.
found it fairly interesting.
That's good. I just thought it was very cool, because To Have and to Have Not is a fantastic film. And Lauren Bacall just steals the show in that film. And you can see, that's where Bogart fell in love with her. And
whenever they're on screen.
It's just dynamic. It's extraordinary to watch. And I adore that film, the old black and white classic adaptation. A lot of that stuff found its way in some fashion or another in the gaming we did, and then by extension in the writing that we did in the Malazan world.
We didn't have a pivot question ready for Hemingway and Faulkner, unfortunately.
We didn't predict that, believe it or not.
I'm surprised.
I was trying to pass the ball to Inge. You got it, Inge?
If I'm taking the ball, we're completely leaving this entire conversation and we're going back to Malazan because I'm so lost, guys. I'm so lost in this conversation.
When India has to say, I understand Malazan more than this, we have
We've really dipped in some territory, yeah.
That is when you know that we have gone somewhere else.
Far afield, yeah.
So we're coming back, and I'm bringing us back, and we're going to chapter 7. And
yeah, chapter 7. I did sort of pre-warn you people, didn't I? About chapter
you did.
Yeah.
You did.
Okay, how many read the chapter in one sitting?
Everyone here except for me.
Oh,
Not you, Josh?
I don't remember that far back in my life.
You're getting old, Josh.
I was a younger man then.
It was too anxiety inducing. I have way too much anxiety for that. But my question to you is, do you remember like very vividly writing that at all? And if so, what at all was your inspiration, or is that just like off the dome, which if so, scary?
So basically what you're asking is what drugs was I on?
Absolutely.
Wow.
In a respectful way, yes.
Yeah. Interesting. When I sat down to write the chapter, I knew that the primary emotion I wanted to evoke was claustrophobia.
Yep.
And I wanted to make sure that I didn't let the reader off the hook in any fashion in terms of ending the chapter partway through or anything along those lines. I wanted to drag them all the way through that journey in the company of all of these characters. So, but if you're going to drag and have these characters make their way through this claustrophobic environment, you can only go so far in describing that environment because it's the same for each character. They're experiencing, the same rubble, the same darkness, the same dust. All of those sort of physical details will be exactly the same for each character. So I didn't want a 100-page or 120-page chapter to bore the reader. And so,
right.
There's only so much description you can do in there. So the only alternative is to look at the internal landscapes of each of the characters and push those as far apart as I could, so that each one was quite unique in how it played out on the journey that everybody is taking. And so in that respect, chapter 7 is a kind of a microcosm for the characters in the entire series and their internal landscapes as they journey through something that, at least externally, they're all sharing, but their appreciation of it and how they interact with it is going to be unique in each instance. So yeah, I pushed all the characters, and I think at that point, Korab, he sort of showed up not initially as a character I was going to follow.
Really?
Yeah,
I love Korab.
Yeah, well, he was, even the name Korab, Bilan, Thanusalas, it's a mouthful of a name. And
when you say it, the last name even sounds like the nuisance.
Yeah, well, pretty much. And so, and he first shows up as a kind of foil for Leoman and almost a comic relief element to him. Yeah. Because Leoman is one of Cam's classic role-played characters. He hardly says a word and he holds everything in, and you're not quite sure what's going on with him. And I always liked that. So Korab was the more vocal foil for Leoman, but also the kind who would express without any subtlety the ideas behind fanaticism of one form or another. So he started just taking shape, and then I think probably had in mind that he wasn't going to make it out of the temple. He might not even have made it into the temple, and yet something held me back and just said, no, don't kill this guy. And so I had him sort of join up and crawl through along with everybody else. And he became, I think, probably the most important character in that entire journey of the seventh chapter. And that can just happen. He just sort of came alive, and he'll play a role through the rest of the series, which was, initially not something I anticipated. But sometimes you realize that that's the case and you got to run with it. So in terms of drugs, no, not really. But just unleashing the imagination, because they're trapped physically in a place. Then the imagination is the only place you can go to make things interesting and explore other aspects of their journey. I mean, also a lot of them start hallucinating, right? There's that whole scene where they eat the honey.
Oh, so good.
And that then once you sort of brought in the notion of that kind of hallucinations, then as a writer, it's like, oh, this is great, because, the reader's on board with this because they've seen them, these characters eat this hallucinogenic honey. Now I can actually go crazy with symbols and archetypes and all the other things that you have to bury in your normal expositional text. But here I could just lay it all out and have a lot of fun with that.
Was it fun?
Oh, it was a blast. Absolute blast.
So when you finished writing that, you weren't like, shit.
No.
But you had to write it over several days. I mean, it's a long chunk of stuff.
I'm sure it was over several days. Yeah.
But still, I just feel like the emotional toll that like it puts the reader through. It's interesting that you were like writing along.
Yeah, but bear in mind that the metaphor of rebirth is pretty much front and center in that chapter. And this is where the Bonehunters are born, out of the 14th. And so it's literally the birth canal journey. And so it's going to be pivotal to the rest of the series. And so generally when I get to a section or a scene or a chapter like that, I bear in mind that this has a larger purpose, and that sort of keeps my focus on what I'm up to. And I just have a blast because, I know it's all there for a reason. And that sustains the writing.
Did you know when you started the siege that it would be a firestorm that sent them underground?
Yep.
Okay, and so you were like, firestorm, how do I do that? Obvious, the walls are filled with olive oil. How do you get there? I really want to know.
True.
One of the things to remember is there are sort of cornerstones to civilization. One of them is olives. Olive oil. If you look at early history, classical history, pre-classical, I guess, rise of the first Bronze City civilization in that region. It was pretty much founded on olive oil, and olive oil then triggers things like trade, and trade triggers new ideas coming in and organizational systems that can deal and manage with trade, and then you get separation of wealth and material goods, and hierarchies arise. Everything sort of comes out of that. I suppose I'm trying to think of what other primary examples you'd have. Olive oil is certainly a major player, say, for the Minoans and everybody on the Anatolian coast and Greece. Wine would be another, and beer would be another. Bread, I guess, although that's generally made locally, in various forms. But olive oil it struck me that would be certainly a major crop or resource in Seven Cities. And if I make, Yucatan is a very old city. It's already had some of its history with the Malazan Empire. And it just seemed like Leomin would make use of whatever was available. And in this case, it's massive stores of olive oil.
When you put it like that.
Yeah.
You fool, Josh. You activated my anthropology expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Duh.
That's wild.
Well, I think it's just an interesting moment because, it's kind of a crash into the mundane in a way, because usually in books like this and in other settings, it's like what a given city trades or how their economy functions isn't necessarily highlighted in the story or important. So then you get to this place, it's like, oh, well, they trade olive oil. And you're like, oh, I guess so,
Yeah. Yeah. And it was the first thing I had to determine was how flammable is olive oil. And it turns out
Did you experiment?
Well, I did some reading up on it, but it is workable. Let's put it that way. I wanted to make sure of that.
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought when I read that. I was like, is olive oil this flammable? But
well, it's got a low smoke point, so you can't really
Right.
cook high heat with it. But I imagine if you exposed open flame,
Yeah.
So we could try it, is what you're saying.
yeah.
Have our own rebirth.
I don't think it.
So coming at a different part of this from the anthropological lens, what evidence in I guess historical societies were there that people had been cooked in their armor? Like, was that taken from anything, or did you just make that up because that was brutal.
So bad.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. If I took that from. I mean, we do know of sieges, and we do know of cities that were set aflame.
Right.
And so, if you're looking, say, at the Crusades, something along those lines, where entire civil populations were executed, or 10% or 50% or whatever, or cities that were set on fire during a siege. It seems commonsensical to think that if you're loaded up in armor, you're potentially at risk of cooking in that armor.
Yeah, you're basically just wearing a big pot.
You are.
Pretty much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oof. Ugh. It's brutal.
It was almost as brutal as actually, I have not read anything that I thought was as bad as the coins on the skin.
Yeah.
Was the worst thing I've ever read.
It's gonna get, and it's this book is the one that it gets a little worse, or maybe it's the one after this.
Yep.
Yep.
Did you have to really convince the editor on this chapter? Like, it's got to be one uninterrupted 140-page slog, or the whole book doesn't work. And because you've said you had a good relationship with your editor, so.
Are you saying that in the past tense? I don't remember. I don't remember if I had to. I may have warned him beforehand, saying, keep an eye out for chapter 7. It's got to go that way. But I don't remember specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Do we ever see Felicity younger again?
Everybody
Or
else
is she just
happy
off in the sunset?
with spoilers on this one?
I mean, a simple yes or no, but I don't.
I imagine the answer is yes, India. It's got it.
I don't know. I hope it's yes.
People want to
We could
vote on
just-
it, or
I'm good with like a very soft like yes or no. That's all. That's all I need.
how is yes
I
or
don't
no
want to know.
soft?
I don't want to know.
Okay, well, yeah, fair enough. I don't need the specifics. I
Why don't you
guess
guys just take your headphones off? It could just be End and Steve. It's like, spoiler alert.
I have to edit this, India.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fine. Never mind. Well, that's to say, I was.
Well, I'm curious. What would you anticipate for Felicity Younger?
That's the thing.
Mm.
Like, it could go either way, is my thing. But now that you've said this, I'm like, maybe she, like, because I just, for some reason, I'm just really into her character. I really liked her. I really liked Hellion. I really like Absalar. We all know this, or I don't know what it is. I don't love Tavor, but which I know is the hottest of all takes. I know, but I just really liked her character, and that ending I don't think would be the worst thing for her. So I wouldn't be mad if that's where it ended. I also selfishly would like to hear more of her story.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know how I should answer that one.
You don't have to. You don't even have to. It's fine. It's just my take on it. I really enjoyed. She didn't have a lot going on here, like at all, but it was better than what could have ended up for her. So
Definitely.
Well, okay. So you've started Reaper's Gale, right? So
Not yet.
Not yet.
Peter,
Okay.
no.
We'll record our first one next week, which means we will all start.
I
reading.
should have started it. I should have started.
Technically, we should have. Indy and I have yet to buy it.
Right.
Monsters.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I can't even give you that bit of information, but bear in mind that at the end of the Bonehunters, there's been an official severing of the umbilical cord for the Bonehunters and the Malazan Empire. And so in that respect, the likelihood that we're going to follow the Bonehunters is pretty high.
Sure.
So maybe that's your answer.
I'll take it.
So when you talk about how, like you were talking about of course the Bonehunters come on to center stage here. They get reborn. They kind of, become this army proper, yada, yada. But as they are focused in on this book, I wonder how you also manage the other characters whose storylines both take steps into a different phase, or that are going all the way, but are also trying to balance them. For example, of course, we follow Mappo and Akarium in this book, and Karsa and Samar. And so to try and manage those storylines that aren't necessarily following this main Bonehunters through line, I wonder what considerations you took to balance their weight in this book.
Well, there is a meeting point. It's just not in the book. It's awaiting you. So this is kind of gathering up those, like you say, those separate groups of characters, and then if you were to diagram it, they have a trajectory, and that trajectory is all converging into a single point. but that point is off stage right now for you guys because you haven't read further in the series. So, bearing that in mind, I needed to bring various characters to that central point. And so I needed the reader to see how they got there rather than just spring them on the reader as having showed up. A lot of the Bonehunters was moving people around in a geographical space.
Yeah.
And, you look at some of the other stuff and my earlier stuff, and I'll have armies marching and that kind of thing. And that sort of gives us a sense of the geography and distance and time in which for things to happen, characters to develop. But generally, it's not the central mechanism for the story. But for the Bonehunters, moving these characters from point A to point B or point Z, whatever, is actually quite central to the structure of that novel. So that's what made it a little bit different.
You've brought me to one of the questions I had as we got to the end of this book, which so the gray swords just sort of like appear at the end, and I feel like as I've read your books, it really, like sometimes the end of the books you do this thing where you're like, I'm gonna do the wildest thing you can imagine, and then I'm gonna really make you feel so silly for questioning it because it totally makes sense. Because I was like, when they were just like, we have a portal through a random warren that's going to get to Malaz City in 3 days, I was like, okay, Steve, but like, what are they really? I guess we got to get there, and then they get there, and you're like, oh, they're actually super important to the rest of the plot, aren't they? And when you do these like outlandish things at the end of your books, have you ever started one and been like, oh, well, even I can't make that one work. We got to go back a little bit from here.
No, I'm usually by the time I've reached the point of writing the end of the books, I've got that pretty much worked out. Because you're right, if I were to sort of invent something on the fly and then have to backtrack through the narrative, that would be disastrous. Because my style is to write in a linear fashion, so I start on page 1 and I end up on page 1,000 or whatever. I don't cut and paste at all because there's a continuity that's necessary, and it's not necessarily visible to the reader, but it operates, and it's a thing that I require in order to tell the story.
So you started page 1 and you were like, and it's going to end with essentially time travel. The end. It's just crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, the precedent was already set, right? We have the Imperial War.
Right. Yes, for sure.
I think if there had been no precedent, then that would have been more problematic for sure.
So a question popped into my head now about Korab. So like you're writing chapter 7, you're feeling inspired and decide to take this character into this new direction. Does any part of you want to go back? Obviously you can't go back to House of Chains or anything, but to earlier scenes with this character to change how he was written, or just to cast a different light onto his story within this book? I mean, does making that decision, obviously it's going to have a lot of trickling effects out, and I'm sure this phenomena was not only about Korab. So did you go back? Would you go back? What do you think about that?
No, I didn't go back. I mean, that has burned me on occasion where,
Yeah, I thought it could get you into trouble.
Oh, yeah, and it has. I swapped genders in some instances. So not going back and just checking on things, that's a bit careless on my part, but I had a fair sense of Korab and the role he had played up to this point. And so there's a part of me that sort of likes the idea that just as in our lives, we don't know where we're headed. And when we arrive there, we can't turn around and go back 10 years and make changes here and there to affect the outcome of what's just arrived. So I guess I like that with characters as well, is that they're not able to predict where they're going. And I think a writer needs that kind of freedom as well, to not really know where that character is headed. Otherwise, things can become very predeterministic very quickly, and then that can get in the way of just having characters do whatever the hell they please as it shows up on the page. And then as the writer, having to deal with that and the consequences of that, which I've always found to be part of the reward. You create a character and they go off and surprise you, and then they create a dilemma for you as the writer and the story you're telling. And then you just have to write your way out of it in some fashion or another.
Yeah, which I imagine is going to happen if you follow a character like that. You could end up in some like, okay, well, this disrupts something I want to do, or I got to figure out how this is all going to go together, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the classic example is Troll Sengar in, so I won't go further than that, but it's just, you go with the character, and the assumption is they're within the world you've created. And so they're bound to it. And there is a narrative flow that's also presumed because I'm telling a story. So there's a storyteller and there's an audience. But other than that, it's that character can go, anywhere they want. And if they want to leave the scene and not come back, then that's what happens. You just have to go with it.
Yeah.
Now, you've talked a lot about in the past about being a short story writer first, and like everything you write being, very thought out and all of that stuff. Is it easier to pivot when a character does something that you weren't planning on or expecting? Is it easier in a short story to I guess course correct, or is it easier in like this, a 10-book series?
It's a great question. It's almost impossible in a short story to correct that. Okay. Because of the necessity of the short story being pretty much a singular focus.
Right.
Whatever it is you're trying to pull off, it's a single focus. Novels, multiple, or innumerable points.
It's about
points
the
of focus.
world in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So just as in our own lives, we could be steered off track for one reason or another. You move to the wrong city to take the wrong job. These kind of things. You can correct it, right, and go back to and resume the narrative with the harsh experience of having gone through what you just went through. And that's how novels are in that sense, that you can draw your characters, you can pull them back, you can yank them back, or you can almost seduce them back so that they're not aware that they've returned to the main narrative thread thematically.
Right.
Anyways.
Cool.
Hello, everybody. AJ here, producer, editor, and co-host of 10 Very Big Books, popping in the middle to give some thanks and to just warn everyone that there's a short combo about spiders and a scorpion coming up. So if you don't want to hear that, skip ahead like 2 minutes or check the show notes for a safe time code. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast, and thank you as always to Steven Erikson for coming on the show and dealing with our, let's say, loose conversation structure. If you'd like to give your thoughts or feelings about this or any of our episodes, you can always email us 10verybigbooks@gmail.com, tweet us at 10verybigbooks, or head on over to our Discord, bit.ly/VBB Discord. That's capital V, capital B, capital B, capital D, Discord. That link will also be in our show notes. Thank you to all of our wonderful patrons over on Patreon who have made this episode and our bonus off-season episodes possible. If you'd like to financially support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/10verybigbooks. That link will also be in the show notes. And as always, thank you so very much to Dan Geserick for making our spectacular cover art. You can follow him on Twitter at @A_W_Dan G for some confounding targeted ads. And of course, the wonderful music in today's episode is by the one, the only Amaranthin from their album, The New Romantic, which you can find along with their other music on bandcamp.com. Links to their pages will be in the show notes, and 10 Very Big Books will be back next week on October 1st, where we'll be jumping into Book 7, Reaper's Gale, with the prologue and chapters 1 and 2. We're very excited for this one. I'll talk to you then, and let's get back to the interview.
I have a question about Hellion. Do you remember your inspiration for that character?
Are you actually afraid of spiders?
No, I have no fear of spiders. I had a pet tarantula at one point named Quiche Lorraine. And she was a female Mexican red and black, big one. And she would escape all the time. So she'd be somewhere in the house. And I think I had the aquarium at home when I was at Iowa. So my mother was taking care of it, actually. And I remember she phoned me once and said it had escaped for the weekend. And she found it in her closet, hanging between two dresses.
No.
In the wardrobe.
Oh,
in the
man.
wardrobe. And she just coaxed it onto her hand and put it back in the aquarium. So no, I have no fear of spiders.
Nice.
I don't like scorpions. I've been stung on the chest, over the heart by a scorpion.
Pass.
in Belize.
Hard pass.
You wanna
It was in the pocket of the shirt that was hanging up, and the shirt was hanging up outside the mosquito netting. And so I put it on in the morning, and this little amber scorpion got me good.
Oh, you fool!
So yeah, don't like scorpions. Spiders are fun. God. But Hellion, I wasn't even aware. I think that Cartool had anything to do with spiders, but when I started writing that scene, something about it, how I visualized it, made it very sort of spectral and gothic, and not squat like a city normally is, but kind of spires and towering. And then I started thinking, well, what can I make that's unique about it? And that's where the spiders came into it all. But Hellion wobbly finds her feet in the book you're about to read, so you should have fun with her.
That's exciting.
Phenom. I like her because she's interesting and like hilarious, but also like a badass character.
Yeah.
It's fun to read.
Good.
Steve, you get vaccinated yet?
Twice, yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Woo! We can finally do that big meetup.
Well, yeah. I mean,
don't get crazy, Josh.
Yeah. No,
a joke.
I don't know. I'd be crazy not to vaccinate. I'm just utterly baffled at some of the opinions that are floating around out here in Canada as much as anywhere else. But
is there a lot of misinformation out there in Canada? Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah, and I think we'll be heading to boosters fairly soon as well. So additional boosters, because there is some issue on long-term efficacy of vaccines. So
there's been more research coming out about that now, right?
Yeah, people have started getting their third or their booster, I guess.
There's an Israeli study that's showing that it's really good. I don't know why I remember reading that.
Wow,
that is where it's from.
Well, Israel did a third thing, and then there was some study about the initial wave of U.S. healthcare workers that got it and their efficiency in this summer. So there's more science being done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The nice thing is the statistical analyses there's a fast turnaround time that didn't exist, before, because it's so, I guess, at the forefront of everyone's thinking. But I don't know. I was going to ask all of you guys, are you all feeling exhausted?
Yes.
About
everything.
About the pandemic?
I think the pandemic is a trigger point, but I think it's a broader thing. I mean, what's the weather been like where you've been?
Oh my God, I'm absolutely destroyed.
Hot. Yeah,
I'm terrible. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think collectively as a species right now, we're kind of worn out. And COVID has just sort of added to that. Mm-hmm. So it's as somebody is a creator of I guess imaginative content, it's more of a struggle now than it was, say, 3 years ago. I have far fewer venues in which to write, and that just wears. It just wears.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I know you like to write in cafes and junk.
Yeah,
and the weather started to turn, so whether I can still sit outside becomes problematic. But yeah, it's been a bit of an eye opener, I think, globally.
Well, how's the weather been by you?
It's been a drought. When you're thinking, West Coast, Vancouver Island, you would think there's, lots of rain. No, there's no rain at all. We haven't had rain all summer. Trees are dying, gardens dying. And it was interesting because I recently drove back to Winnipeg, and one of the first things I noticed when I got through the mountains, first of all, the mountains were on fire. I mean, there's, fires everywhere. So a lot of wood smoke. But when we got through the mountains and rolled onto the plains in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we left the Trans-Canada, the main highway, and took some smaller highways. There was the only insect life you literally ran into, was grasshoppers. No dragonflies, very few butterflies, no mosquitoes. I've never been in Saskatchewan and Manitoba in the summer where you can literally sit outside at midnight to look at the stars and not have a single mosquito. It was, and of course, without the mosquitoes, you don't get the dragonflies because that's what they eat. And things like swallows and swifts, far fewer. So it was very, very noticeable that this was a major catastrophe sort of in the making.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah. It's sad.
Yeah.
I don't know. personally find it very exhausting. I'm always very worried about the climate. So
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think, well, by me, there was just the aftermath of that hurricane and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like, a lot of places flooded. I was shocked because I was not expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, I only had rain coming, like, from in front of my window, but it was coming inside of my kitchen. But it was very interesting. I'll send you a video. But it's just... everything is just kind of going to shit lately, and it's not very fun. No. And it is extremely. I just moved out, and now I live alone, and it's very isolating as well.
Isn't it just?
So
yeah.
Especially, and then Peter, who lives alone but also in Japan. I can't imagine what that's like. But yeah, it's just not. I'm not loving it. I'm not having a great time.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I just wanted to get sort of test the waters on that, and whether or not this was just my own sense of things or more collectively.
No, it's all bad.
it's wearing us down, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that gets into your headspace about like you're supposed to write a book now and you're an author, and like do you feel like that affects your approach to that? I mean,
well, have you read The God Is Not Willing?
I have.
Well, and there's your answer.
This is exactly. Yeah.
I feel like this is an inside joke that I just, I'm not.
No, me either. It's okay, India.
It's easy to explain. It's and this may sound quite depressing, but I'm hoping that the novel itself actually offers up some hope. But if you look at the Malazan Book of the Fallen, one of the subtextual aspects of the entire storyline is about environmental destruction and degradation and civilizations that exhaust their own landscapes. I mean, that shouldn't surprise any of you. That's kind of all there, isn't it? It's been present all the way through. Yeah. Well, with The God That Is Not Willing, we're 10 years after the end of your series that you're reading.
Oh, okay.
And thematically, it's too late. So that's a change. That's the difference.
Me and Steve are going to talk more about it, but I do feel like it's like in the new book, it's almost the most explicit it's been, I feel. You know, it's I feel like you can't miss it.
No, you can't miss it. No, I didn't hide anything there. No.
Inge, the storm you're talking about, a tornado actually touched down in my brother's town and ripped the roofs off both the schools in the town.
Oh my gosh.
In Pennsylvania. Pretty crazy.
Yeah. That is pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah,
not a lot of tornadoes in Pennsylvania.
No. Yeah. They've been touching down in Winnipeg too. And Winnipeg used to be outside the tornado corridor. Not anymore.
Yeah, there's just a big one that tore through a town over from the town Pete and I grew up in.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Destroyed so many.
Yeah, full-on leveled houses.
Yeah.
Wow.
Fun times.
As a teacher getting ready for kids to come back, I can see all the people around me are like, we just gotta have the energy for the kids, and then we go to bed as soon as the day's over, so we have the energy for tomorrow.
Wow. And so you're actually back in classrooms?
We're full blown. We're all in masks, and like most people are vaccinated, but they have not required it of my coworkers. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, wild is not the word I would use, but
no. Yeah, agreed. I just work there.
Yeah,
wild west. So Steve, I've seen sometimes that you're posting memes on your Facebook, I would say, about gross wealth inequality. You know?
Let's get into it.
And then we were talking about this, talking about the climate in the book. I wonder, do you ever feel like you want to use your platform as an author to talk about politics? Do you feel like that's just not something you're interested in? I don't know. Like, do you think you're a very political person?
No, not really. No, politics is it's a subsection of a worldview. It's basically a self-defining and self-limiting way of interacting with an environment that is far more complicated than politics allows. Does that make any sense? No?
Well, expand on that a bit.
Well, you mentioned the word binary earlier. I think politics has definitely lurched its way into binary thinking.
Well, there's two political beliefs, and you're one or the other.
There's one or the other, and no nuance, no subtlety, no flexibility in the positions that are being held. So these are yes, they go beyond politics in that they are ideologies, and
Right.
of course, ideology then plays into how a society constructs itself or perceives itself, and how it interacts with members within that society, even though those members may be completely different ideologically. So you've got this conflicting worldviews playing out, and it plays out in the most crass arena when it's in politics, but it plays out everywhere else as well. And so, as a writer, as soon as one starts thinking of the human condition, you got to take it all on board. It would be too simple and simplistic to argue specifically on political issues without, to my mind, the anthropological aspects of the human condition. And then there's the scientific side of things that relate to climate dynamics, resource. But I mean, even using the word resource for the natural environment is an economic term. So to me, it's almost become more complicated than it is possible to parse in any kind of reasonable way. So, all we really have before us are people making commentaries and observations, and then all I would advise is read anything and everything you can get and listen to anything and everything, assuming that stuff interests you at all. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul, because it seems we're all bound up in a current that is roughly civilization, and we have defined it in terms of progress, but then we've altered the nature of what progress actually is, and we've also applied to it a value system that may actually be wrong, but it's the one that everybody sort of operates on. And so it's I think I'm just rambling now, but it's I just sigh, when the political stuff starts to shake itself out. To me, climate change is not a political opinion. It's not an ideology. It's a reality. Anthropocentric climate change is also, I think, a reality. And anthropology and archaeology has countless examples, that we've actually dug up and revealed. So there's nothing new in any of that. That's been going on since before the industrial age. So yeah, it's you cannot help but write about all of these things if you're going to address the human condition in some fashion or another. And all literature does, all art does. So pretending it's not there, it may work for a while, but I think even children's literature, YA stuff, it's all in there if you're going to look for it. I don't know. I don't feel political in that sense. I feel the rage and the outrage that, many people with strongly held beliefs or ideologies feel. So I share that. But my foe is far more ephemeral. It may be out there, but I don't know if I can point fingers unless it's at the mirror.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a big conversation to have. I think what gets mixed up is like even talking about politics is like, what does that word mean is a whole separate ways, because you can define it a lot of different ways, because I think a lot of things are political inherently, but then there's also like politics, the actual thing, and doing politics, which is a separate, so it's kind of get caught up in a language game anyway. But,
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we all love a good wealth inequality meme, so.
We do.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Well, it's funny because, that extreme of inequality is what characterizes the fall of every civilization in our past history. It shows up in some fashion or another, and it's pretty consistent. And so that's, that is alarming in many respects.
But have you considered this time it could be different?
Well, what's the definition of insanity, right?
Nice.
Do you get frustrated seeing these patterns repeat themselves? Like, is that has to be frustrating, right?
I cycle through frustration, but then some kind of shift occurs in my thinking, and I go long term. And as soon as I go long term, the imminent fate of humanity sort of drops away, and I'm thinking more in terms of the planet and its recovery.
Sure.
So yeah, I just I cycle through that, and there's a lot of energy that could potentially be expended in being frustrated and angry, which I'd rather put somewhere else.
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel that.
I kind of imagine the same way. I feel like climate scientists must just be walking around pulling their hair out that we haven't just stopped burning fossil fuels already. That like I feel like historians must just be sitting there slamming their head against books all the time at just the sheer stupidity of we just can't stop, you know.
Yep.
Well,
because I think it's essentially human, right?
Yeah,
it's like that's all it is, right?
It is. And we may not be unique in that. I think many species are bound to the now, and not, and maybe they have the excuse of not having sentience or lesser sentience or, duller reasoning faculties or whatever. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But they do at least have the excuse of their instincts and their natures. We don't really have that excuse, but we still operate on it. So we often do things against our, better nature. And that's just, it then becomes a question of, well, does society reward that or punish it? And unfortunately, these days, that's not an easy thing to answer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like, this isn't a surprise at all, but there are civilizations in this book that are dealing with, I guess, kind of the immovability of, with like Lether and stuff, and Rulad being this like unstoppable, god emperor or whatever, and the people, a collective, not feeling like they are able to do anything to change it, but feeling like maybe if they bring a Carium or Karsa Orlong, that maybe they will be able to change it. Like, do you think there is any way these changes could be brought about without some sort of like, I don't know,
Mortal Kombat?
Mortal Kombat, but like supernatural force, like some other force from the outside. Like,
we'll have to revisit this issue once once you've read Reaper's Gale.
Sure, okay.
But what does Rulad represent? Having assumed control of the Letheri Empire, which is a kind of a colonial expansionist, I guess ultra capitalist style empire. And of course, one of the things that I was messing around with when I was writing Midnight Tides was the notion that the system is too powerful. It's too strong for this tribal force to come in, put their own king on the throne and make any kind of substantive changes to how that system works. So bearing that in mind, Rulad as an unkillable king represents the most obvious symbolic meaning to the system of the Letheri Empire that one can imagine, because it's literally you can cut the head off all you want, the head pops back up, or a new one arrives, because the system is bigger than the individual. So Rulad sort of takes on a different role, as you'll discover in Reaper's Gale. But the essential meaning of Rulad as a ruler that is unkillable and therefore representative of a system that simply continues regardless of who's at the head of it. I think that hasn't changed. That was sort of there at the beginning, and it's simply evolving now through. When you get to Reaper's Gale, you'll know more of what I mean.
Sure.
When you said the sentence, well, what does Rulad represent? I was so worried you weren't going to answer that question, because I was sitting here and suddenly I'm 5 being asked how to do multiplication again. And I'm like, I don't know.
Well, AJ, it's funny you mentioned Karsa, because I think, you're talking, Steve, about, let me put on my Joker face, society and civilization. And, examining this is obviously such a big theme throughout the books. And I think having Karsa, obviously this outsider in that respect, I would say in the 6th book, those conversations between Karsa and Samar are maybe one of the first times that conversation is really brought explicit into the text in the Book of the Fallen.
Yeah.
And I wonder when you decide it's time to elevate a theme like that into the dialogue and the conversation itself, or when to let it kind of simmer in the background of the stew, so to speak.
Well, Karsa's original story, not to sort of understate it, has a fair bit of action. So it's pretty headlong in terms of that narrative. But by the time you get to him now, that headlong momentum has it's slowed down. And so at that point, if you're going to be writing scenes with Karsa, then you have to sort of You have to fill the emptiness that is the result of him no longer killing everything in sight. So, and then Samar Dev is sort of at the other end of the spectrum in terms of Karsa as symbolic of tooth and claw barbarism, and Samar as one devoted to technological progress at all costs and at any cost. And so these are sort of the two main forces that through Samar and Karsa are clashing. And that allows, a lot of interplay between the two to actually ask those questions of, well, is there an inherent value to progress? And how do you measure progress? Do we measure it in terms of material gain alone? Do we measure it in terms of, population, political will, the ability to dismantle the environment? Or do we measure it in terms of how well do you live within a given environment? And, is progress in that sense a beneficial thing, or is it a survival mechanism? And I think right now we're kind of caught up in the survival mechanism approach to progress. You can paint it up any way you want, but a lot of what is driving so-called progress is actually consumption. We're simply consumers now. And the sad thing is, capitalism requires an infinite supply of resources, and we're plowing through our planetary resources faster than it can rejuvenate itself. So yeah, I don't know if you've done any scuba diving, but there's a little thing on the side of the tank that is your reserve air. And so if you're down 100 feet and you check your valves and you realize that you've used up your 2 hours of air or whatever, you've got the reserve air that you can just pull this. It used to be a little aluminum thing that you just pull down on the side of the tank, and you could use the reserve air to get back to the surface. Well, I think as a species, we're on reserve air, and we're nowhere near the surface. So it's not looking pretty, put it that way.
Yeah.
What a cheery conversation, huh?
Yes,
so
heavy in the last.
But like that's just the honest thing. I mean, it just like I don't know. I could talk about taking climate action, but it's like it's I don't know. It just is. It is what it is. It is how I don't know. It's how I feel. So
Kim Stanley Robinson's latest book I recommend on that one. Ministry for the Future.
There's a lot of good writing, and there's like I don't know. Maybe the show should become a climate. I don't know about you. Some days I wake up and I'm like, how is this not the only thing we talk about? I mean, what are we doing? You know what I mean? But
yeah, because it's exhausting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's why we don't talk about it. And that itself is a survival mechanism, right? Because you cannot sustain that level of existential trauma for any length of time. You just can't. You burn out. You go numb. You become indifferent. And so, we consume to fill up the empty spaces, whether those empty spaces are spiritual or manifest physically. I don't think really matters, but that's what we're doing to sort of stave off the trauma that is, being expressed all around us. And I think COVID is one of the most graphic examples of societal trauma.
It's fucking terrible. Really, yeah.
Yeah, you caught me at a bad time, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I think it's a bad time for all of us.
No, it's honest, and that's more.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did you guys enjoy the Bonehunters, or?
I
think Josh loved the book.
I loved every bit of it. I could read about dumb soldier shit forever. It's my favorite. I need to read Black Company because I've heard it's a lot of a big cast like this, I think, unless I've misread. But no, this is my jam.
Yeah. I think people in the Discord have been steering you in that direction, Josh. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to talk about Korab earlier. And look, if you don't deny it, it's going to be a confirmation. So you might just want to say nothing. But you're talking about Korab and not, knowing where he was going to go as things were progressing. There are people who are reading along with us who are absolutely convinced that Korab is either Opan or touched by Opan or possessed by Opan or something. And they point to the fact that he put his helmet on the cusser and he made it out of the fire, and he wasn't just killed by Leo. They like people were like, there was like a whole essay, and I was like, I think we're stretching. I think he's just in the story. I don't know.
Didn't he explicitly like talk to Opon, or Opon like
Josh,
explicitly say something about
losing
Korab?
your mind. I think that point is confirmed in this book, the one we just read.
Yeah.
I don't think is it.
Yeah, buddy.
Maybe I
I'm
didn't read the
pretty
book
sure
well
it's in
enough.
the scene where we see Leoman talking to the Queen of Dreams, and I forget who's eavesdropping on that scene. I think it's Crocus is sent
Oh,
there.
you're so right, and I'm dumb.
Wow.
There's too many things in these books. No one should have to remember them all.
Well, it's always. I mean, it was great fun writing Korab and his insane amounts of luck.
Yeah,
Right.
That was always fun to write.
No.
I have recently decided that whenever someone asks me like, oh, if you could have any superpower, what would you be? The best luck is the best answer to give.
It is.
Yeah.
Fell out of a building, land on a big pie. I don't know why that was where my brain went, but
While we're talking about, I guess, character questions, this isn't really even a question, but in House of Chains, you said that a lot of the dialogue between Pearl and Lestara was based on conversations that you had with your wife.
God.
Is that true in this book?
Well, you see, as long as I'm completely vague about which conversations, I'm fairly safe from litigation.
Right.
But I mean, that kind of sort of exchange, sort of firing back and forth stuff. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I took verbatim some sections of conversations. Yeah.
Sure.
Do you like Pearl?
Do I like Pearl?
I have never hated a character for such a petty reason as I do Pearl.
What's your reason?
He's just his head's so up his own butt. And if he for like a moment was like, God, what if I'm not the smartest in this room? For like a minute, the whole thing's different. And it just irks me to hell. It really gets me going.
Oh, he's an absolute pain in the ass. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a moment of like
one moment of maybe I don't shoot this poison arrow.
Yeah. I know it took literally 200 other people and then me hiding in the shadows, but I am the greatest assassin warrior ever. That is like, nah. Thank you.
I do like how this or the scene with Lestara like having to actually kill Pearl is like one of the most concrete bits of closure I think we've gotten in this whole series. Like, I mean, I guess maybe it doesn't have to be like, I guess Pearl could still be alive, but it seems pretty like open and shut. Like Pearl is dead.
Yeah.
Lestara killed him.
This is no
and like that, and we're moving on. And like, it just feels very concrete as opposed to a bunch of the other stuff, as in like the Fellis and Younger thing, where, you know, she's just in the desert.
Yeah.
But I appreciated that. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's time to wrap up here. Inge, do you have any final thoughts or questions for Steve?
Steve, it's always a pleasure to have you here, to talk to you. What's new with you? Any closing updates that you have for me about you?
About me, I'm still working on Walk in Shadow. I took a couple weeks off to play around with a different novella, which actually may be a short novel. If I can wrap it up in the next 2 weeks, I'll be happy.
Wow.
And that's kind of a murder mystery set in the Malazan world. Involving
I love murder mystery.
Flicker from the novella Crackpot Trail. So,
which we have not gotten to yet.
You've not gotten to yet, right?
Heard good
Well,
things.
Yeah. Well, when you get to it, that's the voice that I'm writing again right now.
Amazing.
Flicker's voice.
And is that just like a special little, like you had this idea,
Yeah.
you had to do it type of thing?
Yeah.
Well, I believe a few conversations ago we had talked about the idea of you writing a whodunit. So I don't want to say that we gave you the idea.
Well, it's close. That was the character Inspector Hugh McDonough, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That one's still percolating around. Yeah.
Okay.
I've not buried that one yet. So it's still maybe. This one is more. Flicker is the most famous or the greatest assassin ever, basically.
Okay.
And
the
fact that nobody knows about it proves just how great an assassin he is.
Perfect.
That's
Perfect.
true. It's true.
So,
Pretty good.
so it's that kind of a story. But it's set in I don't know if you guys watch Midsummer Murders.
Oh,
No.
yes.
Yes, in Midsummer, this fake county in England where half the population is trying to kill the other half.
I'm obsessed with all United Kingdom mystery shows are my jam.
Yeah, well, Midsummer Murders is it's in its 17th, 18th year now.
Oh my gosh!
And it has literally depopulated the entire county, the fictional county, because
It is
2 or 3 people die every single episode, and these are small towns. It's like the Black Death wasn't nearly as vicious as Midsummer Murders. So I kind of taken that idea of an English estate, ancestral pile, and loaded it up with characters, and then I'm now proceeding to knock them all off. So
Wow.
Incredible.
it's fun.
Sounds like a lot of
It's
fun.
fun. Yeah.
Well, maybe hopefully people get to read it soon.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just looking at Midsummer Murders, and it's 22 seasons. You said?
22 seasons. Yeah.
yeah.
22 seasons.
It's
Yeah,
going
it
forever.
changes main character. The original
Oh my
gives
God.
way to his cousin. It's a blast.
That is a lot of episodes.
It is.
Yeah.
It sounds like it sounds like.
Yeah, don't take it too seriously, but
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
writing's fun. If you want sort of really quick characterization stuff, that's very well done. It's a good series for that. You get your characters painted very deftly, very quickly.
The UK is a bunch, like we have our soaps, but the UK has got some wildly long running stuff over there. I feel like the
It does.
quality's way better.
Oh, what's the name of their longest running show?
Oh, you're talking about
Coronation Street.
Yes,
That's
thank
what
you.
I'm thinking of. Yeah.
That's generational by
'Cause
now. So
Yeah, because that show's been on for
God.
like 60 years or something.
What's the
crazy like
is that now? Is that the radio one, or what's the radio one that they also have? That's got they have a radio one that is like apparently like it's a full-time job knowing all the characters who have been on it.
The way we spiral through topics on this show is like giving
Plus,
me
I have to tell you,
whiplash.
I feel like just some listeners are sitting there like not Americans and are just losing their minds. But
Yeah.
It's the Archers. It's the
Archers.
Archers. It has 19,300 episodes.
Oh my
It's the
Yeah.
world's
God.
longest running drama. Yeah.
Holy crap.
So wow, The Archers is still running, is it?
Yes.
Wow.
It's probably
Extraordinary.
a podcast at this point.
Yeah,
To be
honestly.
honest.
do you think they make jokes about tweets now and like canceled and woke kids or something?
Don't know.
Have you visited any places, Steve? During this
I was
time?
just back in Manitoba, but that is it.
What is that? I've never heard of that.
Manitoba?
It's a place in
It's
Canada.
in Canada.
How do you know?
I listened in school.
Can you visualize Minnesota and North Dakota? Okay, well, it's the 2 northern states in the Midwest. Okay, so think of the Great Lakes. It's west of that, and it runs up against a straight border. Beyond that border is Manitoba and Saskatchewan, etc.
How far is that from
Man.
you?
Let's say I drove back and forth. That consumed about 6,000 kilometers, so 3,000 miles back and forth.
I'm sorry to our listeners in Manitoba.
Oh, I
It's
love
nothing
Manitoba.
personal, guys. I was never good at geography, so
And I guess also sorry to our Minnesota and
I know. We don't need to apologize to them. They get it. They know.
Oh, I'm sure they get it. Yes.
is it like cold?
No, it was. Oh, I'm gonna have to keep translating from Celsius to Fahrenheit. It was.
I'm pretty okay.
Yeah, it was over
Like,
30.
0 is cold.
Over 30 Celsius when I got there. So,
Wow.
high 80s, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And it had been a very hot summer. And
Yeah.
there had been 47 days without rain. And we arrived there, and within 3 days, they had the heaviest rainfall that they've had in those 47 days.
Wow.
And I posted a picture of a trail in southeastern Manitoba on my Facebook page. It shows a couple of trees sort of snaking down a cliffside on the side of a lake. And it's always one of my favorite trails. It's called the Hunt Lake Trail. And because it had just had this massive rain, this is the kind of thing you sort of notice that is alarming. At least it was for me. The trail beside the lake was lots of snaking roots, but a lot of humus. Yeah, a lot of humus down between the roots, which kind of softened things up and padded your walk. Well, because of the immense dump of rain not only had the lake risen about 4 inches from one rain, all of the humus was completely washed away. So basically, it felt like you were walking on human bones. That's what it felt like, because the roots were all exposed.
Wow.
And the entire trail was basically destroyed. And that's a trail I've walked since I was a kid, and it's gone. It's pretty much gone. So we walked for maybe, I don't know, an hour and a half and turned around and just went back because it was so unpleasant to walk. And I don't know if the trees will survive that at all. Yeah. So yeah, Manitoba. The drive was great. In Saskatchewan,
Good.
I just love Saskatchewan. I'm trying to think how I can describe it for you, India. It's the Great Plains, and the Great Plains was traditionally tall grass prairie and short grass prairie. And the tall grass stuff, if you think Iowa, you think those areas all the way down into Kansas, that was all tall grass prairie, and it's all gone. It's been wiped out. Short grass prairie persists in ranch land in Saskatchewan, 1/4 Manitoba, and down into Montana, parts of Utah, and that region. South Dakota will have some as well. So it's you get cactus, like small cactus. You get scrubby stuff. You get trees in the old drainage valleys from the glacial drainage, and you get the biggest sky you have ever seen. It's the most extraordinary sky. Montana used to be called, I don't know if it still has it on its plates, but Big Sky Country.
It does, yeah.
Yeah,
it's
well,
crazy.
it is. Yeah. And there's no way to describe what that means unless you are there. But when you're there, you know it. It is a Big Sky Country, and there's nothing like it.
Yeah, when Pete and I did our road trip, I actually got nauseous from it. It really it really messed me up for a minute.
Really? Why?
Yeah. I'm from Delaware.
Okay.
And so everywhere around us is super duper flat, but there's tons of trees. And so I'm really used to not seeing a lot of sky. And the first time we were there, and I was just I don't like that I can see at all. I felt really small and insignificant, and I wanted to puke in the car.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell Peter or the other guy. I was just real cool, guys. Love it.
Oh my God.
Well, conversely, you can walk out there and be the tallest thing.
Yeah.
The tallest thing
for miles.
So, it depends on, if you want to feel small and insignificant, I suppose it's the place to do it. Mm-hmm. But you can take it the other way.
It's all about perspective.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hold on. Sorry, really quick. I just wanted
Hold on.
While we were catching up, in the last conversation we had, you had said you were about to start playing in a Star Wars tabletop game where you were playing a droid with I guess multiple memory chips or something. How has that been going?
We could only meet up, I think, 3 or 4 times because it was just timing was off. This was a Wednesday night. I think the guy running it has kids, and so we didn't last that long. But I did have some fun with that character. And then I've just recently read a science fiction novel where you basically have that style character that can break itself apart, and like a robotic character that can go in various places. So, yeah.
Nice. Just wanted to catch up with that before I said goodbye.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get back to it in the winter. We'll see.
Yeah.
I was thinking this morning when I was making breakfast about how, our first interview was right before the pandemic. We talked for the first 2 times. And then I remember when we talked for Memories of Ice, it was the first time. It was early on or so in the pandemic. And I was what a novel experience. I was here we are having a pandemic. Just totally different time. I feel like those first few months of the pandemic were just a totally different world.
They were.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Josh, any last note for you?
Nope.
Cool beans. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Steve.
Oh, my pleasure.
And we look forward to talking to you at the end of Reaper's Gale, probably sometime early next year.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, let's clap now if we can.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Oh, Steve got in on it.
Oh, got the
Nice.
clap. It only took 6. That was that. All right, that was the whole thing. Steve, thank you so much for coming. We were just trying to get you on video clapping.
Sounds good.
We're good to go.
We're gonna get paid handsomely for that.
Yeah, well, somebody's
Yeah.
got to complain about it though. So
Yeah. He
What
claps
kind
from
of
his
clap was
wrists.
Yeah.